Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2020 panel discussion series, Uncensored, and this is brought to you by Transparency Initiative Seychelles. My name is Marceline Zialo. I am your moderator for today, and joining me for this topic, our topic for today is land, is on my left, Mr. Robert Gankou.
That's right, hello.
Mrs. Nicole Girardi. On my right, we have Mr. Jean-Paul Morel.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Frekali. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you very much for being with us today. So let's dig into this straight away. Land. When I say land, it's a vast topic. There are so many issues that hopefully we have time to discuss most of them. What is the issue with land that you want to start with? I will give each of you about 2 to 3 minutes to have an open statement. Mr. Morel, would you like to start first?
Sure. So I would like to speak about the young today. So they finish university, they finish school, and they would like to acquire some land and build a family. And so it's one of the biggest purchases that you will have. So you need to have more guidance for them, more clarity. They need to be able to afford it, and the banks need to come in and do something. So I think that's one of the things I'd like to mention. And also, we talk about confidence for investors. We want to have proper policies so we don't sell all the land in Seychelles, but maybe designated areas like apartment blocks where it's not physical ground land, and we can justify selling these things to non-Seychellois. So related to that, helping the young to buy. So we're talking about understanding where they can buy, what they can buy. There's no list. You can't go and get a list, and you don't know how long you're going to wait. You don't know how much it's going to cost. So there's a lot of things that are not clear. Mm-hmm. So clarity and confidence.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Mrs. Sio.
Well, I would very much like to go further upstream with regard to the right to what people express as a right to buy land, to own land. And whilst it is undisputed that once you own land, you have a right to enjoyment of your property, and that's a constitutional right, there is no constitutional obligation to enable citizens to own land. There isn't any constitutional obligation. And I think that needs to be better understood by people generally, that buying land is an investment opportunity, it's a business opportunity like any opportunity in life. There is no reason why the state should subsidize land in order for the general public, members of society, the citizens to buy land. And there is also no obligation on the state to subsidize housing for people to be able to buy land. The constitutional obligation is clear. It is with regard to ensuring and assisting people to be able to benefit from decent housing, to have the right to shelter. It's more the right to shelter than it is the right to property. And it's the right to property is not to have your property taken away from you. So I think it's very important that we understand exactly where we come from when we step up to insist on I want to buy land and I want the state to sell me that land. That is not how it should work. And in fact, the throwback there, that's why I said we go further upstream, the throwback is to a time in 1981, at the start of the Second Republic, when the state took it upon itself to introduce a statutory obligation, because in the Tenants' Rights Act that was introduced in 1981, there was a statutory statement in there, statutory obligation that the state would do everything it could to ensure that all families could become owners of the properties they owned. And that killed the investment market for many people who had already spent a lot of their investments in in building homes and renting those homes, because they lost their property not through an acquisition, a direct acquisition by government, but through the purchase, what became almost the compulsory purchase of tenants of the properties they were renting. So it became a statutory duty for the landlord, the statutory landlord they called him, to sell his property to the statutory tenant, because the statutory tenant was registered. And as a result of that, I believe that is where the common misunderstanding has come from, to say that we're all entitled to be able to own a property,
Land.
one man, one house.
Okay. All right.
And I think that needs to be revisited so that our people can understand. The Act has been repealed since 1992, in fact, even before the Third Republic came into place. So somebody recognized it was wrong at the time. And I think it's important that we go back there. That's why I say further upstream.
Yeah. We will go back there. We'll go back to some of the interesting points that you said. Mr. Gonko, what will be your opening statement?
My opening statement is land is a very, very important thing for all of Seychelles. We use land for so many purposes, but most of all, the thing that we have to realize is it's a gift that have been bequeathed to us by our ancestors who came here 250 years ago. And they've worked a lot of the land on that land to make it habitable for us. So we owe it to future generations to protect that land. Most of all, something I've been very involved with is protecting our sovereignty. I think that's very important. If we're not careful, especially with the geopolitical situation, we risk having our sovereignty compromised. So that already will have an impact on our land ownership, what we want to do with our land. And we must realize that the amount of land, usable land in Seychelles, is very small.
Yes.
When you look at the size, we have over 400 square kilometers of land. But when you take all the mountainous areas, all the areas that are difficult to access, the amount of land we have for agriculture, for housing, for infrastructure is very limited. And if you add the rising sea level, which eventually will have an impact on habitable land, we have a great duty and responsibility to protect this land for future generations. And another thing that concerns me with the growth of world population, with nationalism in so many countries, is we might need land not only to accommodate the younger generation coming in, but we might need land that our diaspora will find it difficult to live where they're living, to come back to our country to live. So one thing, a question that concerns me a lot is the question of land linked to planning permission and linked to nationality. From the colonial government, we inherited a very progressive land system. It said, if you're Seychellois, you can buy land from any other Seychellois without getting Council of Ministers permission. But if you're non-Seychellois, you needed to get the Council of Ministers permission. You had to pay a fee for that permission, a greater transfer fee for the property. And now, sadly, for some very dubious reasons, we have had so many people that have been given our nationality, and any policies you could think of making a distinction between Seychellois and foreigners is very blurred. That poses a lot of issues.
Okay.
And
so I will stop you there because we will come back to these very interesting points and challenges that you come. I just want to get Mr. Ali to jump in and to give us, his take, his 2, 3, 4 minutes of the opening statement.
I think it is very important for us to understand that when Seychelles, when we had the first settlement and thereafter, land was given by concessions to the settlers. So the crown itself did not own land, owned very little land. And if you look at a map of Seychelles or Mahe or Praslin or Ladig for that matter, the crown did not own any land. The state, if to use what it is today, did not own a lot of land. So from what Mrs. Thiron has said, there would have come a time when the whole issue about land redistribution would have come to the fore, because land was given. As I said, if you look at the map, there were estate of XYZ, but a lot of them they eventually purchased the property from those who received the concession initially. So whilst we appreciate to some extent how the law was at the time, and if I may put it to a large extent, progressive legislation like the Tenants' Rights Act, which was trying to correct a certain mistake, but in a certain manner that caused a lot of loss to a lot of people who actually purchased those properties. As I said, it would have come to the fore, but government in '77 under the Acquisition of Land Act did acquire a lot of property and paid very little in terms of compensation. And it was definitely the wrong way maybe to carry out this land redistribution. And eventually the state paid a very high price when we moved to the Third Republic. Then the government had to pay a lot in terms of compensation. But as I said, at an appropriate time in our history, we would have had to carry out the redistribution of land.
All right, thank you very much for your statements. It's a very, very interesting topic. I know it's going to get really controversial. Let's go back to what Mrs. Thiron said about the constitutional rights. And I want others let's start a conversation with that. Do you think that the Constitution as is clear? Do you think it should be like it is now, or do you think we can do better? We have only, Mr. Ganko has said, 400 square kilometers of land. We don't have a lot of land. So should we be like other countries, do like other countries with a massive amount of land, or can we do differently in terms of our constitutional rights? Mr. Moy.
Well, I've seen that we've done a lot of reclamation. In 1982, I remember, Singapore was 444 square kilometers, and Seychelles was exactly the same, 444 square kilometers. Now Singapore is much bigger. They've reclaimed a lot more. We have reclaimed some of it. Obviously, we have deeper oceans and so on, and more mountains, and they are more flat. But that extension could be used for a lot of things. So as you said, we have a lot of mountains. We can't use a lot of the topography. But, however, with all that, then there's a lot of opportunities, possibilities, potential. So if you sell to a foreigner a piece of land that's reclaimed, it doesn't feel like you're selling a piece of the original Seychelles in a way, or an apartment that's built up in the air. So you're selling a space in the air. But then you have the sea level issue also. So I think it's important to note that there is actually a lot of land in Seychelles, because if you look at what they've done in other countries, I think I would not like to see it become a New York, but we can do a lot better.
All right, so you think land management, we'll come to land management.
Yes.
I'll just go back to my original question about the Constitution. Would you like to say a bit more about that, Mrs. Thiron, and because you started this, and I think it's important. But
What I would like to do, first of all, is to share the right to shelter.
Okay, good.
I think it's because this is the constitutional right. It's one of the social rights in the Constitution, which, incidentally, just to focus, have rights that are guaranteed to every person, and rights that are guaranteed, or that the state will make sure that it does everything that it can so that people can enjoy, citizens can enjoy the right. And the right to shelter is one of those social rights, which is guaranteed. It's Article 34 in the Constitution. It says that the state recognizes the right of every citizen to adequate and decent shelter, conducive to health and well-being, and undertakes, either directly or through, with the cooperation of public or private organizations, to facilitate the effective realization of this right.
Okay.
It doesn't say that the state will give.
Okay.
So to me, that's the first thing. There's a misconception, a misinterpretation of that article.
Has the state actually given before? I don't think they give. They sell you at a very discounted price.
No,
and in fact,
this was, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Ali.
This was the
Yes.
point that I was making, that when we say that the state, we want state land, land bank land, because what has happened here, the state has acquired, in the exercise of redistribution of land, the state has acquired somebody's land, or probably purchased it with the person's arm pinned behind their back, because this is what has happened in the past, and it still happens to a certain extent today. The state has obtained that money, carves it up into little parcels, puts it in what they call the land bank, and then sells it at a knockdown price.
Sure.
That is not guaranteed. This is a present given by the administration, and we have to recognize it as that. It is no right, but it's a present.
Okay, but what you're saying is that people perceive that, it's my right, that, even if you don't have to give, but you have to sell me a plot of land. Mr.
Yes.
What's your...
What Mrs. Dion has said initially is she's correct in that you have a right to property, and your right to property is to own property, and to dispose of the property, and to enjoy the property. Now, there is no right per se for the state to sell you land or for you to acquire land from the state. There is maybe a perception or an expectation from many people that I will apply because the state has a policy, has a system in place where you apply to the state for you to purchase state land, and the state will then sell you state land according to its policy. So if you will be able to build, then you will you may be considered for acquisition of state land. If you will not be able to build as per the new policy, then the state will consider giving you shelter in terms of a house if you can't afford to build a house. But there is no right there is no obligation on the state to sell you land. I think this should be very clear to everyone.
There's
there is some. It's quite blurred to a lot because
it's not pronounced.
It's an expectation.
Yeah.
And if I can just add on that, where the expectation comes from, it is a policy. But like all policies, unfortunately, they are not couched in legal terms. They're not available generally to the public. Usually, from my own past experiences, policies are always some sort of under-the-table thing that somebody pulls up and has a look at in the hiding behind the card. But the Tenants' Rights Act, and we'll come back to that because, like Mr. Ali said, just mentioned. It was trying to redistribute at the time. So we're in that context in 1981. Section 4 of the Tenants' Rights Act, curiously, talks about the object of the act to assist in enabling every Seychellois family to own its own home by giving security of tenure to Seychellois who own and occupy a home on another person's land. So you see the language was already putting it out there. And by enabling those Seychellois to purchase the land or premises and in the administration of the act and so on. So you see that the very conception of this was to introduce that policy and to take it one step further to make it a law. This became statutory. It became an obligation. The minute, in fact, when the law came in, all the tenants, everybody who was occupying somebody else's home, was given a year in which to register. They were put on a register, tenants' rights register, and that gave them, if they'd been 5 years in there, that gave them the right to buy. It obliged you as the landlord to sell it to them. And you could not sell it to anybody else in the meantime. You couldn't say, I got a better deal with somebody else. Okay. And it even went to the point of where if there was a disagreement on the valuation of the land, the Ministry of Land Use at the time SHDC, would send in, SHDC would send in the valuer, assess the value of the land, and that's the money you got.
Okay. I want Mr. Gaku to jump in now. He's been quiet.
If I may.
Let the lawyer talk first.
We have to understand that at the time, under the 1979 Constitution, it declared in its Article 1, Seychelles shall be a sovereign socialist republic.
Yes, yes,
so
of course.
This was more or less in tune with the socialist principles. So we need to contextualize.
So it was a political
we need to
decision.
contextualize the law at the time.
But
eventually, this is why Mrs. Sima has said, even prior to well, I wouldn't say prior to the Third Republic, it was more on in anticipation of the Third Republic, because we had already moved to multi-party system, and certain laws that they felt should not find its place in the Third Republic were repealed.
So the revolution has started already. Mr. Gaku.
Yes, I like to take my turn after the lawyers. Quite a lot of people think land reform started in 1977. Exactly the contrary, because Mr. Frank Ali lives in a place at Amitié, Pralin, and that was one of the first part of land reform. Yes. This land used to belong to Mr. Désiré Cauvin. Government exchanged this land, massive plateau, for Félicité, and the government divided into plots for agriculture. That was part of land reform. There were projects like Belvedere, Tobruk, Cantobourg. There was also Pascal Village, that was an NGO. Pointe-Lauri. And when I came in as PS, I was responsible for land in 1977 started. And I worked directly with Mr. René. The first land he bought wasn't a land that was acquired in a land acquisition act. It was bought for 3 million rupees from Mr. Najon, with Mr. Najon very happy to sell his property upon which we built it. So there was a program of land reform. And one byproduct when we talk about transferring land from the old register to the new register. And there were a lot of land that would have been considered as abandoned that was transferred to the government. So although quite a lot of land were distributed to the settlers, but government got quite a lot of land, whereas land started getting into the new register. And I think when you look at the Tenants Act, I think it was an effort to give access to people land, which is a laudable thing, but where it was a very lousy system, where it was unjust. Sometimes it takes it from land from people who were worse off to give it to people who are better off. And as we've seen now, with the benefit of hindsight, a lot of land acquisition was very unfair, and there have been a lot of abuses too. And we can go into that. That will be a very interesting subject that I would like to
after break, we can go into that as well. Just because Mr. Mowell wanted to say something on the matter as well.
Yes, I was saying, I was going to ask if any lawyer reading this would interpret it in the same way. or let's say 5 different lawyers looked at the Constitution.
Whether this can be interpreted in different
what
ways.
Mrs.
And
Sierra
about our right
What
to
the
own
tenants'
property.
rights
No, the
the
Yeah.
tenants' rights and the
plus as
previous
well, the previous,
paragraph.
the constitutional
Would
rights.
everybody interpret it in the same way?
I think what Mrs. Sion has originally said about the enjoyment of the right to property, I think it's a correct
Clear.
statement. It's very clear. Your right is to own, is to alienate, is to sell, to dispose of, and to enjoy property. But there is no provision that you government obligation on the part of
Obligations.
government for you to you will acquire property, or you have a right to acquire property, and that right is to acquire it to who would be prepared to sell you, because the right of a person who owns property is to alienate it and to sell it or dispose of it, and to dispose of it in the manner that he or she wants.
I think that's a very good point.
Now, however, the Constitution, as a restriction, restricts non-Seychellois from.
Yes.
So there will be a law that the law, as it is now, is presumed to be a law that is necessary in a democratic society to restrict a person, a landowner, to dispose of his or her land to a non-Seychellois.
Okay, good.
And I
And
think,
with that, we shall take a short break. It's a very interesting topic, as you can see, obligations and rights, and we shall come back soon. So we are back from the break. Our topic of discussion today with the panelists is land. And let's bring up a controversial topic about foreigners owning land and about how much restrictions does the law restrict Seychellois to sell property to foreigners. Mr. Morel.
Right, so being in the real estate business, so land can be bought by foreigners against popular belief, if you like. A lot of foreigners still ask me until today, even though on the homepage I say land can be bought freehold by foreigners. Of course, you have to follow a sanction process, so which means the government will look at the person's identity, if the funds are clear and clean. And they have, as Nicole mentioned, some policies, as Monsieur mentioned. So it's not law that says I can only sell 1 acre to a foreigner who's buying a house. But if a foreigner tries to buy a house on 10 acres of land, they won't be able to nowadays, because they will say, you don't need that much land. We don't have so much land to sell, unless you're doing a small project, a commercial project, a warehouse, a hotel, that's different. So foreigners can buy land, but there's no clarity. When I go to the planning department, they say, yes, it's very clear. Well, if it's clear, then why does some sanctions take 6 weeks and some take 4 years and some are still not finished? So when you don't know how long something takes, are you going to take money out of your pocket? Yep. You go to purchase a car and you're not sure when you drive it that it's the car that you're buying and when you're going to get it. So I deposit my money here and I don't know when I'm going to get my piece of land. The currency has changed. Somebody will lose, somebody will gain. Land is like falling in love. You want it pretty soon. You don't want to wait 2, 3 years, because then another better deal will come along. Or maybe you've lost interest. So there's a lot of issues talking about, okay, whether foreigners should buy land, that's one. I believe we should have certain designated areas. We should have a think tank that decides on really good policies and look at some neighboring countries and islands, what they've done, and people just go and buy and sell, and nobody complains. It's very fixed, it's very clear, and land is retained. I think there's is it 90% of Seychelles must remain for Seychellois? Or you cannot sell more than 10% of Seychelles? I don't know if that's a law.
Yeah, does anybody know about the laws, the legal
There's supposed to be
framework
some
around
kind of limit.
Yes,
limits? Yes, Mr. Marco.
I listened to a discussion in the Parliament before it was.
Dissolved.
It was what?
Dissolved.
Dissolved. That's right. I was looking for that word, and the minister said, "Oh, at the moment, 6% of our land, only 6% of the land, is in the hands of foreigners." But what that says nothing, because we know a lot of foreigners have been able to get land by being given Seychelles nationality, which have made a mockery of any policy to make access to land, some land to Seychelles, some land to expatriates. So therefore, if you take 6% of land, is a lot of land in the hand of foreigners. If you take away all the national parks, all the land that beside national parks where we cannot build anything, and then you add all the new Seychellois who bought land, some of them who bought land for speculation with dire consequences. Another issue we have when we look at the issue of foreigners to come in to buy land and given our nationality, one thing we have to think, it's quite often to the detriment of Seychellois. Because quite a lot of these people are here because they got their money through very dubious means, and they're using Seychelles as a shelter. And if we want our professionals, our doctors, our engineers, our nurses, or even our own population to have a home with a view, a place where they can really enjoy, that's my little bit of Seychelles, I'm prepared to make the sacrifice. You want to make access you want to facilitate access to them. Otherwise, if they cannot get this attachment of a house, they cannot compete with people coming with all this money, speculating on our land. They will go back and we will lose some of our best professionals. I think that's a major factor that we have to bear in mind in the policy. And I would like to add, although quite a lot of land have already changed hands, I think we have another tool that we can control and that is how that land is used. And this should be done through the planning authority, through planning permission.
Okay, yeah, I think we need to discuss land use. But Mr. Ali, are there controversies, with the law of Seychellois being able to sell land to foreigners? Like Mr. Morel mentioned, lack of clarity. Is there really lack of clarity?
No, we have a law called the Immovable Property Transfer Restrictions Act that regulates the acquisition of land by non-Seychellois. And then you have a certain government policy with regards to this, because as a person who owns land may claim that his or her right to property is to dispose of his property. And so he should be permitted to dispose of his property or his or her property to whoever he pleases, he or she pleases. Now, because there is a constitutional right to alienate, to dispose of your property. But the Constitution permits a restriction to this right, that a law will regulate how you dispose of property to non-Seychellois. So, and then the law, under the law, the government will have a policy. For example, we have also to tie in the development of the property. For example, under the Investment Act, Seychelles Investment Act, there is a regulation that restricts certain activity, the carrying out of certain activity by non-Seychellois. So for example, a non-Seychellois would not be able to own a accommodation establishment which is less than 15 rooms. So therefore, if somebody wants to purchase a property with the intention of building 15 rooms, that person will not get the government permission to purchase the property. And so policies would be created around the intent and purpose of the law. You will not be able to put everything in the law, But then, as Mr. Gonku said earlier, there are certain charges, special charges, when a non-Seychellois purchases property in terms of sanction duty, which is maximum is 30% of the value of the property or the purchase price. There is a sanction processing fee. Then there is a normal stamp duty that everybody pays to purchase property. So all these are a mechanism in place to regulate the acquisition of property by non-Seychellois. And this law has been there for a long, long time. The actual law was enacted in 1963, but the law was there well before, possibly in the 1700 or 1800. You had to apply for the governor's permission to purchase land if you are not a British subject in Seychelles.
Okay, all right. So maybe, I don't know, is it a question maybe of implementation of these policies?
I think the answer is in the Act, the Immovable Act, the Immovable Property Transfer Restriction Act, states that a foreigner can buy, but you may not sell to a foreigner unless that foreigner has sanction. What is called sanction in the Act, which is actually permission, approval of the Cabinet of Ministers, that the sale may be done. But the Act itself provides that conditions may be attached to this transfer. And those conditions have to be met, because if you fail on a condition that is included in that sanction authorization, you can actually lose that land. You can, that sale can be declared, and it's happened. There have been cases.
Yeah, there are cases.
It can be declared void.
For example, I'll give you one case. If you purchase a property as a foreigner, it clearly states if it's for a residence that you can't rent it out. And some have rented it out for business purposes. So, of course, in those cases, they can be in trouble.
Yes.
But I believe there should be wealth building. Why should I invest some money and I can't rent it out? Are we attracting only the retirees who want to stay here all the time? Or we want to attract some other people also. So I think there should be a balance. So a lot of these things should be adjusted. And to talk about clarity, the law seems clear, but if I want to buy this piece of land, the government cannot tell me, planning cannot tell me what I can do unless I submit an application. In Hawaii, you go and buy any piece of land, you know exactly what you can do, and I can make a decision now. So the thing is, it's not clear. I can't decide when it's not clear.
Yeah, so it's probably the implementation and
But I think this is where we have an obligation.
The sanction is supposed to clear out and remove these dubious people and have the FIU, and they take so long. But still, how do we get those dubious people coming in? So they're not doing a good job.
Yes, Mrs. Seal hadn't finished with the...
Because when you look at the rules with regard to acquisition, to purchase, the permission that you get, and they set out those conditions. Those conditions can be with respect to the building that you're going to make on there, because it says, and I'm quoting again from the legislation here, matters to be considered, and the power of the minister to impose conditions. And he, in considering whether to accept the application and grant sanction, the minister shall have regard to the character of the applicant. So he has a KYE exercise to carry out on this person. Okay, so he needs to know character, whether the person's declared purpose in acquiring the land in question is consistent with the policies of the government. So, encore faut-il, the government must know what its policies are. And one is assuming that it does. And those policies, again, should be a matter of public knowledge. It should be available to the public, so you can check as against the sanction that's given whether this is correct, and whether the proposed acquisition, and this is the biggest one, is in the interests of Seychelles.
Yeah.
So we have all the tools in place for the minister, for the government, first of all, to take a position with regard to foreign ownership of property in Seychelles, and for the minister to be able to apply that set of rules in a perfectly above-board, open, transparent manner when it comes to making the decision. The problem that we now have is the government probably snookered itself in the process over the years by saying, because this is too complicated and we can't really justify what we're doing here, let's change the process. And what we can do is, hey guys, you want to become, you want to buy property? Hang on a minute. How about becoming Seychellois? And I don't know what story was, $200,000 was being paid, $1 million, God knows how many dollars. But that became the easy way round, because once you had that passport, you were free to buy land wherever you wanted. And that was the speculation period. Remember, some of us may be too young to remember that, but I think the rest of us are. That we had a very bad period when we had no foreign exchange in this country and everybody was selling their birthright for a fistful of dollars. So it became the golden opportunity. This was the way to circumvent this law. Now, if this law was passed back in the day because the British wanted to make sure that Seychelles remained British, they had some good reason to do it. They did it very well. And we were doing it extremely well in the past, because we actually have a lot of foreign nationals who paid every last penny of money coming into Seychelles to build and invest here. There have been some very interesting foreign expatriates who've bought property here, who've built secondary homes, and who've invested. And that's okay, because many of these people have actually contributed to the local industry, to the economy. But today we're seeing large structures that are going up everywhere that have, you wonder,
so
how could any minister in his right mind tell me that he's applied what this law says he should apply?
I know I'm getting to you, and it's very interesting. I just want to ask another controversial question. But should, having the small amount of land that we have, do you think a foreigner should be allowed? Because I know there are some countries that they're not allowed, they lease or whatever, they're not allowed to own land. Do you think that foreigners moving forward should be allowed to own land in Seychelles? Or, I don't know, individuals, people, it's a couple of islands. Should we don't have a disruptive system, a different system?
Definitely they should.
What do you think? I'm going to go Mr. Grand.
Well, for me, it will be a matter of closing the gate after the horse has bolted, because we've given nationality to so many people, and the sad thing about it is the way some of the land has been used. You have next to me, I have a Chinese, somebody of Chinese origin. He's Seychellois. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak French. He doesn't speak Creole. He's built a massive, what should be a community of Seychellois people.
Who incidentally bought from a land bank person who bought from the land bank at a knockdown price.
Sometimes you get that one. But what you do get, the harmony of a community is disrupted, and you don't have that community, and it's a way of life as well. So, and there's that aspect. But the aspect of what is even worse, the point that Mrs. Chiron raised, there's a lot, government through acquisition had a lot of land that the government itself sold to foreigners. For example, if you look at Belazar by the sea, where the fishermen now, Fishermen Cooperative Association has built a kind of a market, just so that the fishermen can have a place created, was a place nationalized by the government, and then the government sold it to some Arab people. I don't know whether they're foreigners or whether they've got Seychelles nationality. And then the fisherman, to get a place to use, has to go and beg or squat on this foreign land. So we have a major issue. There's a lot of order required, but a factor, I count on good policies to sort it out, like good planning, laws, regulations. But you cannot say no foreigner owns land. But you have to be very careful what kind of people. I remember during the time when we talk about sanctions under the Immovable Property Act, everybody who applied for sanctions, we sent we asked Dun and Bradstreet, a security firm based in London, to do a report. Then they send the report. They do research on the people. They send a report saying he's good. But I remember once a report came in, a character. They won't say he had counterfeited money, but this person has counterfeited money in his own country. So I expected his sanction to be declined. On the contrary, he became a citizen of our country, and he played a very important role in our history.
So some policies to change here. Mr. Moel. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention we have the COVID that sort of is mostly happening this year. And what is keeping the economy going without the tourism? We have the fishing, and we have Eden Island. And who is buying on Eden Island? So imagine if we didn't have that, where would we be? So we have to think also, we do need foreigners, we need tourists. And I'm not saying sell Seychelles, I'm saying sell it intelligently, have Seychellois meet together and decide, okay, how are we going to make the economy stay strong, have some good investment, make people want to invest, and make it easy and clear and fast. In Dubai, I did some research. You can buy a property within 24 hours. The title is on your name. Now, how come we can't vet people? If somebody comes in through the airport, you let him in, you let him spend at the hotel, but you don't let him buy property. You should not let him in the first place. So I think we can facilitate things because they can't take the land and go away with it. It's going to remain here. If they didn't declare things properly, the money is not clean, you take the land back. But you have to make things clearer, faster, more efficient. And that means departments have to speak to each other.
So you're saying yes, but improve the system and improve the
the system, make
balance.
it more efficient, and look at, okay, what are we saying? We don't say we don't need foreigners. Everybody needs each other. And they provide a lot of employment for Seychellois. But I think give them a passport, which is not Seychellois passport. It's like a PR. You have rights to buy certain areas, but not buy where Seychellois can buy.
Okay. Okay.
You see?
can't make anybody a second-class citizen. It's either a first class or no class.
No, you have some policies like that.
That you change, turn this thing on its head.
Yes, for example, in Singapore, you can get your PR if you like. And you can buy a certain size of land, but you can't buy the same as a Singaporean.
Okay.
So it's been working. But if you spend 10 or 15 years here and you decide to give them a passport, then you've decided. But of course, once you give them a passport, you can't stop them from buying an entire island if they have the means. So there should be some restriction there if you were not Seychellois born. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Another thing,
we had a lot of big investors.
It's when you have these activities, it means whether we've reclaimed land, we alienate the land. And how much benefit do we, as a country, get it? Because it's a very heavy cost as a country to alienate some of your land, like we've done with Eden Island and things like that. And who's getting the benefits? We want a bigger share of the cake.
Yeah, it's a sensitive issue. Mr. Ali, you've been quiet, so chip in.
I think from what you've said with regards to the benefit, one thing that maybe government will have to consider is if whenever there is benefits from sale of property to non-Seychellois, what do we do with the sanction money? That is the sanction duties. Do we use it for our own budget, or do we create, let's say, a sovereign wealth fund, and then we bank it in that sovereign wealth fund, and then this money is then invested for the future generation? So these are things that a government will have to look at in order for such benefit not to be simply used for current expenses. Because when you receive such funds, often you not expect to get such revenue, because somebody comes to Seychelles and said, okay, I'd like to buy a large plot of land, and the property is available. And often they want to buy a property that is already in foreign hands. And then the government would say, okay, the person bought this property to carry out a hotel development, and now that hotel development, the person will not be able to do so. So as a result of that, it will be easier to grant sanction, because the purpose to use the property is the same as the seller, but just government will have to vet the new purchaser to ensure that the money is from a source that is not from illegal activity.
I agree, but it's very difficult to make a decision if you don't have statistics, if you don't know the trend, if you don't know, for example, how many local properties are they buying, how many foreign properties are they buying, how much are they buying, is the buying trend increasing? I can't go anywhere and get this information. It's not available. How does the government decide if they don't have this?
Until we have a good land, a good plan.
You can have a plan, but you need the statistics in place.
But for example, in Seychelles, it's very difficult to value land. Valuing land is very difficult. We do not have qualified land valuers. For example, in other countries, you have certified valuers. Here, we use quantity surveyors to value land. Quantity surveyors value bricks and mortars. They don't value land. If they were to value land, any other person will claim that he can value land. So this also is, we have some land economists, but they haven't ventured as much in the private sector for them to be able to give a proper valuation. I was in a court case once where I objected for a quantity surveyor to give a valuation of the land, but the court said no,
they can do it.
They can do it.
So we're just taking a short break, and we shall be back soon. We are back from a break, and we're having a very hot discussion about land. And now there is another topic of controversy about land grabbing, about speculations. I don't know if speculations are true, of officials or people taking land illegally, or we can call it corruption. Can we discuss that? Can we start with Mr. Gankou?
Well, certainly. This is a subject that interests me a lot, because a lot of people have been given custodian of this very important asset for this generation and for future generation, and they have abused their stewardship, and they've either take the land for themselves or allowed people close to them to benefit from the land. This, I think, is a very serious issue, and I think it should be addressed. The problem should be addressed as a matter of urgency.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Do you think?
I'd like to distinguish. Obviously, people have a right to property. They have a right to buy property. And people are generally free to go out on the market and buy. I suppose it depends on the length of your pockets. You can buy as much land as you want. You can have hundreds of parcels of land. And I would not have a problem with that. I would have a problem if you have what was state land. I think that this is perhaps what Mr. Gankou was thinking of, but didn't quite state it. So let's put it on the table. It's about state land, because custodians, those people in government who are responsible for land, have a duty, having purchased or acquired, compulsorily acquiring that land from other people in some greater good, have a duty to make sure that that land is redistributed, if that was the intention, in the best possible and most equal way, if we are still to remain within that socialist philosophy. It's when we find a number of parcels of state land that have entered the private domain and have now become the property of certain persons. And when you look at the persons, you realize that these people at one point or another were probably close to power or had power. That is where the problem arises, primarily because state land has a procedure to follow for its distribution, for its redistribution. You do not just take and hand over to somebody else. There is an entire process. Because the state has taken it unto itself to become owner of large tracts of land, that's okay. But if the state is now seeking to dispose of that land, then we need to kick in procedures. And one of the things that is notable, which has to explain why we set up the land bank system in the first place, is generally the state is not allowed to sell land that belongs to the state. It's got to go through a process. And that process has to be followed to the letter. The State Land and Rivers Act, I believe, is a piece of legislation. I haven't got a copy, sorry.
It's all right.
Didn't bring one on this. And I think that as long as that procedure has been followed, the objective will be that people can get land provided that the state has liquidated its asset to the best possible price. So that if the state has got the best possible price for an asset that it's sold, well and good for us all. But it's when you look at the 1 rupee and the 2 rupee transaction, that is when the questions start to arise. And that is, I think, that's where it hurts. And I believe that there is a possibility that at some point in time, those sales can be challenged, and legally above board. People can be put to a choice: either they pay for it in its real value, or they return it to the state.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Ali, do you think this can be challenged if it can be proven that people abuse their power?
There is something we have to understand is that, as Mrs. Tiran has rightly pointed out, we have a framework. We have a legislative framework in terms of the State Land and River Reserves Act. And the law prohibits the state from disposing of the property without going through a process. And land in excess, I can't remember if it's 3 acres.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure myself.
I'm not sure. I didn't look at the law before coming here. Although I looked at that 2 weeks ago, you have to dispose it only by public tender. But what has happened, most probably, is that there is a circumvention of that provision. So what you do is you subdivide the property, you buy a smaller portion by agreement, and then by private agreement, and then you buy another portion, and then finally you end up with what? But this is a circumvention, and you see, in the old days, this would have, when you interpret the law, this would have been acceptable. But it's no longer acceptable, especially with anti-money laundering legislation, because what you're doing is you're trying to use means of circumventing the law and for your own good. So it has happened, most probably, in Seychelles, and where people has been able to acquire large property. But at the same time, there is a process in terms of every plot of land that government has to dispose of, you have to get a permission. And that approval has to be either the president or, which has been delegated at one point in time, to, let's say, the minister responsible for lands. So there is a process under the law, but it's how the law has been circumvented to a large extent.
All right, Mr. Moel, what's your take on this?
Well, there's quite a few points related to this. One of them is the justice system. So one of the reasons why these things happen is because it's not strong enough. People are not afraid to not follow the law and own 10, 20 parcels of land, which in fact they should have only one. You go to the industrial estate. When I go to the office there, I said, if I want to do some business, is there any land available? no, you can't buy it. We're going to put it on tender. When is it going on tender? There's no date. We will notify you. But when I left, they never asked me for my name, for my number. How will they notify me? So I think a lot of things need to be done. So one is, if you do something wrong, there has to be a consequence. Otherwise, you just change to another department and you do the same thing. So yes, the provision of the law is there. Everything, the framework is there. But it has to be applied. The law is useless if it's not applied. It's just a piece of paper.
I think Mr. Morel has raised an issue which I wanted to raise, and in fact, it dovetails with what Mrs. Thiron had started her discussion with regards to the expectation of the people for government to. And today we have a lot of businesses that has the expectation that they will use their profits to invest in other businesses, but not to invest in the business that will sort of generate more cash. They want government to give them land, to lease them lands, to expand their business. But the actual profit that they receive, they would not. They would put it elsewhere. So there is this expectation that government will lease them land, especially with regards to reclaimed land. And as Mr. Morel has said, you need a policy in place. How do you have a plan as to a development plan of the property? Yes, I want an office space. Now you bid for it. Now a lot of the leased land are leased at a very subsidized rate. When maybe government, but again, the socialist principles sort of, or what we've inherited to a large extent, and which is still inherently within our people, that no, government will have to, because we need, just like a parent gives one a start in life, the state has to give us a start in life. And what has happened? A lot of land has been given out, have been leased out to a lot of people, and they have failed to develop the properties.
That's right.
And as a result of that, they find ways and means, loopholes in their contractual agreements or leases, for them to be able to dispose of the property to somebody else. So, as we said, it's a vast topic. There's a lot of issues that will come to the fore.
I'd like to add one little thing to that. It's so true, this paternalistic attitude to
L'État-providence.
L'État-providence, and that's why they call it providence, I suppose. Because it really, when you think about it, you have investors, little businessmen who get a plot of land and who are going to build on it. The first thing they do is throw up a building with 12 million rupees, I have no idea, and offices. And those offices are rented out to businesses, to little businesses who are trying to set out in life and to start at prices. These are not knockdown prices.
True.
And yet the person holding the lease of the land who's built the property is paying 2,000 rupees, because that's what it is. It's sort of 2,000 rupees a month for the rental. And I think that it shows you that the businessman himself is thinking in terms of, I've got this subsidized land, I've built my property on my block on there, and why shouldn't I make money out of it? And never stops to think that, but hang on a minute, shouldn't I be paying a little more than 2,000 rupees? That's something that needs to be addressed in education.
Yes, jump in, Mr.
Yes, but I think that's one class of people which I think we can have a bit of sympathy for. But there's another group of people. These are the very well connected people who have managed to corner prime plots of development land, sometimes reclaimed development land that has costed the government a hell of a lot of money, sometimes just leave it there following and not even paying the rent, and just waiting for a developer to pay a massive amount of money. And then they will, perhaps, if the government is lucky, pay the government what they owe the government. And this kind of speculation, you have this kind of speculation, is discouraging development. It's not encouraging it. And just, if I may
Quickly,
We have
yeah.
this also in the private sector. A lot of hotel sites where sometimes you had hotels already on it that is being sterilized also because of speculation. So you have it on government land,
You
the
also
claim
have
land,
it
and you have it also.
All right, okay. So our time has run out. I will just give you briefly 1 minute each to conclude our topic of discussion for today. So shall we start with you, Mr. Ali? Your general conclusion, very brief.
No, as I started, we have to understand that land is a scarce commodity, and therefore we have to have a good management policy in place for land in this country.
Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Morel.
I agree with Mr. Ali, and not only the policies, but we need to help the people who need the land to get it. So the young people who want to do business, and that's where I mentioned about clarity, about making it attractive but not selling Seychelles. So these are very important, and a very strong justice system.
Justice system. Thank you. Mrs.
I
Sia.
suppose it's all about a plan. It's having a plan with how you develop land. It's plan how you allow developed land to build up your economic base, and how you then apply that plan using the legal structures and the legal frameworks that you have. It all boils down to having something that is transparent, that is clear, that everybody can buy into and understand, and abiding by it at the end of the day. And until we do that, we will not move forward.
Okay. Transparency, good. The final words to you, Mr. Gako.
I agree entirely what has been said by the other three participants, and my advice will be we have to learn the lessons of our mistakes and think very carefully how we use the land, not only for us now, but to protect this land for future Seychellois.
Thank you very much. And there you have it, our conclusions for this topic of land for our panel discussions today.